All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Hitting the Field podcast. It's your boy Jeremy Brener, and today we are beginning our Last Dance recaps. It is the 10-part documentary of the 97-98 Bulls, and three guys who were born right around then are going to recap it for you. Jeremy Brener here. I was born May 20th, 1998, so I was just about a couple weeks old when the Bulls won that title. Nick Geddes, how old were you when the Bulls won that title?
I don't think I was thought of yet.
You weren't thought of yet. See, yeah.
I don't think so. I came a little well over a year later.
There you go. Robert Husby, how old were you when the Bulls won that title?
I would have been one because I was born in March of '97, so I believe I
97.
would have been 1 year old. So yeah, I don't remember any of it.
So it makes sense for three guys that have absolutely no recollection of that time recap what we saw on the Last Dance, which chronicles that time. But I think that's interesting though, because what this Last Dance documentary is doing is it's giving people that weren't a part of that generation a glimpse into what life was like for those Chicago Bulls, for the NBA in the 90s. And it's kind of like we get this sense of, MJ is like this god almost. He's the greatest of all time, but we can't really prove that yet. We can. We have stuff to watch, but this is giving us an opportunity to kind of show us more rather than just putting on a basketball game and letting us decide for ourselves. It's giving us a reasoning behind why people believe this, why people say this, why it is what it is. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah, I think like you kind of hit it right on the nail for me. Like obviously we're all, like you said, we're all born after the Michael Jordan era, and we always hear the things that he did and the stories, and we look at the stats, we look at the highlights, and we have to like really. It's hard for us to put into context because we didn't see it, and then you see everything just out of 2 hours last night. Really, is all we saw, and you kind of it was unconfirmed. Like everybody thought he was a god. Like Larry Bird said, he was Michael Jordan disguised as God in that Celtics series, and he was 23 years old. I mean, it's just insane to hear the stories that the guys he played against and the people that covered him in the media said about him, and even like a lot of the young kids back then, like saying like instead of having presents underneath the tree, they wanted to see Michael Jordan play, a regular season basketball game. And I just like I don't know how many guys like nowadays like people would do that for, but a lot of people were doing that for Jordan back in the day.
Yeah, Michael Jordan. This is kind of like a way to kind of say, this is me, and this is my life, and this is my life from my perspective. I think it's different when there are documentaries done about people that aren't themselves, but this is this is coming from MJ himself. His stamp is on all of this. This is him telling the story. Obviously he's not the only one, but he had a huge part in how this was getting out there, how this was being chronicled. And so this is probably like, Michael Jordan's a very, quiet person in general. He has his big company, but he doesn't really speak out and express his opinion too much. He's really just a businessman. But this is a rare opportunity for us to listen to what he has to say about his story and how things went down from his perspective.
Yeah, it seems like it's a lot more personal than a lot of documentaries are. It's similar to, I guess you would say it's similar to. It really gave me Tiger King vibes. Now it's going to sound like really weird, but Tiger King vibes in the sense that they let like a camera crew be there for a full year, filming everything, shooting everything, and getting footage for this documentary that's happening 25 years later, however long it is. But the fact that they have all these personal interviews with players, they've had interviews with, obviously MJ is the most interviewed player, but they have interviews with Phil Jackson. They have interviews with
former Chicago resident Barack Obama.
Bill Clinton was in there when they were talking about Scottie Pippen in the second episode. So they have a lot of like background people that were there as sort of these, if you look at it at a historical aspect, these primary sources that were there and can tell the story and back up sort of the story that Michael Jordan is trying to tell about his career.
Yeah, so I kind of want to start where the episodes started last night. Obviously, it was two parts, 2 episodes, and we'll be getting 2 episodes for each of the next 5 weeks. So we really got started with the Bulls in present day. And, the documentary is about the last dance and the final season, but more so what we learned last night is that there's a lot of flashbacks, and it really, what I think is going to happen is we're going to see almost the entirety of Michael Jordan's career in this documentary in one point or another. But we started out in the present day, and we get to, I guess, meet the characters. I guess if I'm going to talk at some points during this podcast where as if I never knew any of this beforehand. This is because that's what it is. Is I think a lot of people who have zero prior knowledge of who of what Michael Jordan was actually about the Bulls, that team, you're going to get a pretty much a really great understanding just by watching this documentary alone. So it starts out, you meet Michael Jordan, and he's the 5-time champ of the Chicago Bulls. But then you meet Jerry Krause, and Jerry Krause is someone that he was a big theme in that first episode, in that first hour of what we saw last night, where Jerry Krause, we're trying to figure out why would you break up the 5-time champs, and it's because Jerry Krause had a very interesting look on the team, and there was animosity there. There was a power struggle, if you will. But we get to meet Jerry Krause. So I don't know what you guys thought about Jerry Krause beforehand, but what do you think about the personification of Jerry Krause from this episode?
I think that the legacy of Jerry Krause is really difficult to assess really going forward, because at one hand he is the architect, the GM of maybe one of the greatest dynasties that's ever been in sports. And at the other hand, he may be responsible for killing it when it may have not been done yet. And you look at all the things that he did along the way that alienated, especially Scottie Pippen. It's just really insane to think about that a GM could do something like that. And I have a hard time thinking that would happen nowadays. I couldn't just imagine that happening. And I think a documentary showed that there was a lot of behind-the-scenes baggage going on. And even people that were around back then may have not even known about that. And on the surface, it looks like it's just a team winning 6 finals in a span of 7-8 years, and it looks like it's just smooth sailing. But behind the scenes, there was a lot going on. And I think the most shocking thing was that you find out that Scottie Pippen requested a trade that after 5 titles because of Jerry Krause, and that just shows you the impact he really had and kind of a stain on that organization.
Yeah, you definitely get the sense that the documentary is, I don't want to say like completely painting the picture that he's a villain, but he's sort of the, if there was an antagonist in this documentary, he's kind of the main antagonist so far. And he's sort of the guy that, like Nick said, he's, alienated Scottie Pippen. Also the whole Phil Jackson thing where he basically tells Phil Jackson, listen, I don't care how many titles you've won. I don't care that you signed 1 more year here. I already have the guy next in line who I've groomed. You're done after this year. That's it. 5 years is enough. You're done. So no matter what happens, I don't care. I think it was Phil Jackson that said, I don't care if you go 82-0, you're done anyways. So, it's you definitely get the sense that he tries to have this big imprint and he wants some, gratification for what he's built. And obviously he's made big trades and he has helped assemble this Bulls team. But you definitely get the sense that he's starting to break it up a little bit, and that's why the dynasty starts to, crumble a bit, as most dynasties end up doing eventually. But you definitely, get the sense that Jerry Krause is the antagonist, alienates Pippen, alienates Phil Jackson, even Michael Jordan. You see a few times Michael Jordan is in practice and stuff or in the hallways before a game, and he sees Jerry Krause, and he's like, hey, you're going to dunk tonight? He's like, we'd have to lower the rim, a bunch for you. And he makes fun of his weight. He makes fun of his height. So you can see that there's a lot of tension between the general manager and players like Pippen and Jordan and even, the head coach.
Yeah, in a way, I sort of felt a little bit bad for Jerry Krause because First of all, he was not interviewed for this film because he passed away during the creation of the film.
Right.
So any of the interviews that were, I mean, they did show some interviews from him back in the 90s, but he wasn't given that opportunity to kind of explain in the present day. So I feel a little bit sorry for him in that regard. But I think what was interesting was the opening shot of where we saw Jerry Krause, and it was him. It was him coming out of the Berto Center, and he was like trying to get away from the camera. And you notice that a lot of the shots, he's not in them. And at least that's what I noticed from the first episode. But for me, Jerry Krause, because Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner of the Bulls, described him as the sweetest person you'll ever meet. But something happened during the 91 season and the 97-98 season where things just didn't happen. Like, I think something that was noteworthy was when he didn't invite Phil Jackson to that wedding. I can't recall what wedding it was, but he invited everyone on the team except for Phil Jackson. And not to say that Phil Jackson would have gone to the wedding. I don't think he would have, but just it's the kind of thing, it's common courtesy. Like, you can't just invite half the people to an event. You have to invite the whole team. And the fact that he didn't proved how much he didn't like them. And I think that it's easy to make front offices the scapegoat when things go wrong, but in some capacity, the relationship is a two-way street, and you do have to make it work so I think that while Jerry Krause is to blame, and while Jerry Krause did not, play a single minute for the Bulls in helping them win that title, something happened. There's more to that story, and I don't know if it will be told during the documentary because it's Michael Jordan's documentary, and Michael Jordan has the final say on what goes out, and he might not necessarily want some negative press from this coming out. But for me, I mean, maybe that's just the sympathetic part of me, but I don't think that that's all the story. I don't think that Jerry Krause is entirely to blame for this. I mean, what they told him, I mean, even if it was fun, maybe they had that relationship where those jokes were in play. Because I know that there are friendships, there are colleagues that can banter like that, and it's good. But from what the documentary made it seem like is they were making those jokes in jest. And they were making those to poke fun at Jerry Krause at his expense, not to, banter with him. It was more so to make fun of him. So there's something there that, and maybe that's why Jerry Krause is so upset and so angry. But also the players probably had something happen to where that would prompt them to do that. And if the case was, because it was also mentioned earlier that that might have been the 86 season where Jordan had the minutes restriction. But if that's what that stemmed from, then that's incredibly petty. I hope that we get a little more insight in future episodes as to what really went down between Krause and the Bulls, because to me, there are some pieces there to the puzzle that just doesn't make sense yet. So maybe we'll get them, maybe we won't. I feel like if we don't, it's because Jordan's at fault, but maybe Krause is the one at fault, and if he is, then we'll see that in future weeks.
Yeah, I'm interested to see, more of like what happened between him and Phil Jackson, because they talked a little bit about how he just didn't like Phil Jackson and they were drifting apart. And obviously, like you mentioned, Jeremy, the whole wedding thing and the fact that he invited the head coach of Iowa, I think it was Iowa State, who he was grooming at the time to be the next coach of the Bulls. He invited him to the wedding and he knew him for like a couple months. And here, he's known Phil Jackson, since he's the one that signed Phil Jackson
to Chicago. Yeah.
Yeah. And doesn't even invite him to his wedding. So, I'm interested to see more into, I don't know what the future episodes are going to be. It seems like the next episode might be a little bit more about the Scottie Pippen trade and all that. Spoiler alert, he gets traded, as if that wasn't common knowledge. But, it seems like the next episode is going to go into that. But, future episodes, I'm interested to see, the Phil Jackson episode. What happened here between Phil Jackson and Jerry Krause, and really where did it go sour? Why is a 5-time championship winning coach, he doesn't care what he does the next season, he's done with them.
Yeah, I think. Yeah. Go ahead, Nick.
Oh, it just really doesn't, like you said, none of it makes sense, and you just feel like there's a lot of, like, we're at one end of the spectrum and we're at the end of the spectrum, and everything in the middle, like, we're all a little, like, lost right now on how it could happen, how in the span of 7 years of just winning, nothing but winning, and you should honestly maybe have, like Jordan has a statue outside of Chicago. I mean, you could argue Phil Jackson deserved one too, and for whatever reason, the firing of Phil Jackson, or the removal of Phil Jackson, whatever you want to call it, was what halted it. And it's just crazy to think that a team could win that much, and GM and coach can win that entire time and not really like each other.
It's trouble in paradise. I mean, that's the best way I could describe it. But let's move on to Michael in his early years. So oftentimes in this documentary, in these episodes last night, more so in the second half of last night's episodes, where we go back and we see how Michael Jordan grew up. And you can see why. You sort of get a little bit more of an understanding as to why he is the way he is. And let's start more chronologically. So growing up for him, Wilmington, North Carolina. They talk about how he grew up with older brothers. Especially Larry is the one that came more into the forefront here, because Larry was seen more as his dad's favorite child, is what it made it seem like. And because Larry would go in and help his dad with whatever he was building in the house, and Michael wasn't there, and it was always, he would tell Michael to get out, but he would let Larry come in, and he kind of built that animosity, not necessarily against his dad, but more so like, hey, I wanted that, and you wouldn't give that to me, and you're telling me I can't have something. And that was also something that his dad brought up in that interview, where he was, don't tell Michael he can't do something, because that will be the one spark that kind of gets his gears going. So I guess I don't know what your guys' experiences with siblings and all that, but have you ever had that in your life where, like, maybe a sibling takes away some of the light, or whether someone else, maybe on a sports team that you played with, takes some of the spotlight away from you, and that kind of made you a little bit jealous?
Absolutely. I think it's like, human nature. I can relate more to playing on the sports team side. Like, everybody likes to value themselves at a certain level. I think we all just naturally do that, and you may think that you should be valued more than other people think that you're valued at. And a good example of that is you're on a team, and you're a good player, the other guy's a good player, he's more flashy than you are, and you're just more of a nose down, hard working kind of player. And naturally, everybody's going to point to the guy that's flashy and go with that kind of guy. Or if he's bigger or faster, things like that. You may be just as good as him, but because he's flashy or things like that, that's something that could come up. And, I mean, I could relate to that absolutely. So I can definitely see where Michael got the motivation and, the will to continue to prove people wrong.
Yeah, I definitely think that was a very humanizing moment from last night's episodes, where you really got to see, a flaw, I guess, in Michael's game, a jealousy. And that's not necessarily, I don't know if flaw is the right word for it, but it showed that he's human too. He grew up just like everybody else. He grew up in a house. He grew up with siblings, and, a lot of siblings, and, they were hard. It was a hardworking blue collar family, the Jordans. Dolores worked at, I believe, the banks, and his dad worked at General Electric, and they would, work really hard to make ends meet and make sure all the kids were satisfied, because I believe he had two brothers, Ronnie and Larry. Might have had a sister as well. So, like, that whole family, like, that's a working class American family, and it kind of brought a sense of, the hero origin story, if you will. I thought that was pretty neat.
Yeah, I mean, I can't personally relate to it like you guys can. I was an only child growing up. I mean, I'm still an only child, but so I never really had to deal with that, luckily. So I'm kind of happy. But yeah, you definitely get the sense that they are a very close family. But definitely Michael was fighting for that attention over his older brother because his older brother, at least at the time, was viewed as the superior athlete, and he was the one that kind of garnered his father's favoritism. But Michael says, he's very close with his brothers, and if he didn't have conflict with Larry, if he didn't have that competition, he thinks he would have been, worse in the long run for it. He wouldn't have been as good of an athlete, as competitive of an athlete, and you really see, prior to him even attending North Carolina, you see how competitive Jordan was, even in his own family, just to get that attention, and it really shaped his mentality when he got into the big leagues.
Yeah. I think what we saw, and obviously, the story that's often told with Michael Jordan, that's been told many times before, is Michael Jordan didn't make his 10th grade basketball team, and how he was so upset about that, but he worked harder, and he got better, and eventually made the team, and then he went on to go to North Carolina, and then win at North Carolina, and then go to the NBA, and win 6 championships in the NBA. So that story was again told last night. Mom Dolores gave a little bit more insight into that and how upset that made him. But have you? I mean, does that give more of like an explanation as to like why Michael is the way he is, and how it feels to be rejected from something?
Absolutely. That thought probably carried with him his entire career. Remember that coach in 10th grade that said, I didn't have it? Well, you know what? I do have it. And he kind of talked a lot about it when he got drafted, how, his own GM who drafted him, said, I wish he was 7 feet tall, but there was no centers left, so we took Michael. Like, that was the attitude of the guy that drafted him, for crying out loud. I mean, so right away when he gets drafted and he's finally made it, to the show, he already gets stuck with more doubt from people in his own organization. So he's had a lot of kind of ammo that's been thrown at him that he's been able to turn into motivation, extra motivation, and I think I turned him to like a killer on the court. Really, I truly believe that based on what you heard last night, and you have to see it. You also get to see how hard that he worked, and everybody sees the billionaire Michael now, and like his mother brought up, he at once upon a time he was a part of just a normal family. He was a normal kid trying to find his way in a very hard environment in Wilmington. So I love the way that they humanized him and they brought him back down to where we could kind of see him through the eyes of everybody else, like we would see everybody like a normal person. So I really enjoyed that, and you can definitely see why he is the way he is because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and when he got to North Carolina, he also kind of experienced that where he wasn't necessarily the best player. And James Worthy brought this up. Where James Worthy, North Carolina was James Worthy's team, and then 2 weeks later it was Michael Jordan's team because that's kind of his momentum from his high school life carried over into North Carolina, and despite being the best player in the nation, arguably for those 3 years, he goes into the draft as the 3rd overall pick, but I think it shows because the Rockets had the number 1 pick that year, and they chose Hakeem Olajuwon. Now, where the NBA was very interesting back in the 80s. In the 1980s, the Rockets had the number 1 pick in 1983, and they selected Ralph Sampson, who was the best player in college, and he was 7'4". The next year, they also have the number 1 pick, and they take Hakeem Olajuwon, another 7-footer. That was sort of the beginning. That was sort of the beginning of the end when Michael Jordan came in, where big men dominated the NBA. Because obviously you can look at the fact and you say, oh, Michael Jordan's the best scorer in the country. He's the best, led North Carolina to a title in his freshman year. That's the guy we want. But in that NBA, it was about size, and it was about having the big man dominating the game. And that's what the Rockets are trying to do with Hakeem Olajuwon and Ralph Sampson. And obviously, you look back and you say, well, maybe the Rockets could have gotten Michael Jordan, but Hakeem Olajuwon was the best big in the nation, and therefore the best player in the nation, because that is what the NBA was looking for. They were looking for big men. And Michael Jordan, when he came into the league and he came out guns a-blazing in just his third game, they mentioned that on the episode last night. That was sort of the tipping point, I think, where the league became not as much about big men, but more about scorers and more about guards who can score. Michael Jordan changed that for the NBA.
Yeah, I think
definitely.
it's.
So,
No,
go
go ahead,
ahead.
Robert.
No,
Go ahead, Robert.
oh, thanks. No, yeah. So I think it's a perfect case of hindsight is 2020. You know, we talk about like what happens if the Rockets had taken Michael Jordan first overall. I mean, that changes the whole dynamic of the league. If he amounts to the same career and the same success with the Rockets, but Hakeem Olajuwon was the consensus first overall pick, and even I believe again it was the GM of the Bulls, not the GM of the Bulls, the guy that drafted Jordan on the Bulls. He even said, listen, he's like, if we would have went back in time, he's like, still Olajuwon was the first overall pick. If the Bulls had the first overall pick, they were going to pick Hakeem. They weren't going to pick Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan kind of just fell to their lap because like they even said, Portland had the second overall pick, and they didn't pick Jordan because Michael Jordan played the same, position as Clyde Drexler did. So that's why they didn't pick Jordan either. So you see, like, it was kind of, complete luck that he fell to the Bulls, not necessarily his talent. And someone else in the documentary also said shortly after that, like, the Bulls were very lucky that it didn't happen. The draft didn't happen after the Olympics because Michael Jordan went off in the Olympics in '84 when the Olympics were in LA. So he was just going crazy. And the head coach of the US was like, this guy is like the best athlete I've ever seen play. Like he's the best basketball player I've ever seen personally play. So you see how, hindsight is 2020. And, Hakeem Olajuwon had a great career with the Rockets. I believe his numbers retired. He's a Hall of Famer. If I recall. So,
right.
he's no slouch either.
Rocket of all time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it wasn't a bad pick. It's just you look back on it now, it's like, wow, what could have been if Jordan had gone first overall? Or what would have happened if, the Trailblazers just said, listen, we'll take Michael and, we'll figure out what to do with two guys at the same position. But, the Bulls were very lucky. He saved them from, a complete disaster of a franchise.
Right. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I on the Hakeem Olajuwon going number 1 overall, I don't think, to this day, I don't think anybody should ever give the Rockets any flack for that at all, because Hakeem Olajuwon is probably one of the 10 best players to ever play the game of basketball, and he's got a championship to show it for it as well. So there's no shame in that whatsoever. That was a great pick by Houston, but it's also a testament to Michael Jordan to really transform the NBA, and kind of along with Isaiah Thomas, where they made it guard play as winning championships. So that's just another tip to the hat of Michael Jordan's career, that he really changed the game, made more guard play, and it was picked up by other people later on, like Kobe Bryant, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, but really what that was about was Michael Jordan was transforming the game on its own. And he did that in his rookie year, where he was the runaway rookie of the year, an all-star, became one of the best dunkers in the league as well. That was something that he helped manifest that dunk culture in the 80s, especially with guards. And then you also bring into the fact that he took a franchise like the Bulls that had absolutely no playoff success before he got there, and he turned them into he turned the corner with them. And I believe they were able to make the playoffs in that '85 season, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, to go from no playoffs at all to back in the playoffs is tough to do as just someone on your own. So I mean, that's what Michael Jordan did, and there was very few people, at least that were guards, that could do that. So props to him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So we go from Michael Jordan's first season in '84, '85 to second season in 85-86. And this season was headlined by his broken foot, which kept him out for majority of the season. And then he met a crossroads later in that season where he was trying to rehab the injury, maybe trying to get back a little bit too quick. He was very anxious, is what he said, and he would go to UNC, go back to school, finish his degree, and then he'd play in the gym. He'd go one-on-one, and then he would work his way up so that he could play fives. And then he came back to Chicago, and he was, full speed ahead. He was a lot better than what the Bulls thought he would be. And then he was like, yeah, well, I was playing for about a week, and that really frustrated the Bulls. And maybe you could see that as part of maybe the front office's animosity towards Michael. And maybe that's sort of what started souring the relationship a little bit. But then the coin was flipped when Michael Jordan was able to play again, and then his minutes restriction kept him, and they were very strict about the minutes restriction. You cannot play a second longer than 14 minutes a game, or what was it, 14 minutes a half? Because there was originally, what they didn't mention in the documentary last night was that originally that minutes restriction was 7 minutes per half, but then that minutes restriction only lasted maybe 2 or 3 games. Then they elevated him to 14 minutes a half, so 28 minutes a game. And one of those games was that game against the Pacers where it was a big game for them to possibly qualify for the playoffs, and he had to be taken out of the game right in crunch time. You're down 1 point, and you refuse to play Michael Jordan. That to me was crazy. I was surprised that that was a thing. Like, how much is 13, 14 seconds really going to affect Michael's injury?
Yeah, I can't. Yeah. I can't believe it. I never knew that story. Like, as probably y'all didn't know either. We just learned that for the first time, and I really just, it's just mind-boggling. It really is, and the fact that leading up to him getting taken out, he's the one scoring. He's the one getting the Bulls back in that game and keeping that game going. And you just pull him out all because you want a top pick. Like, if you have a chance, it's just can't believe it that you have a chance to make the playoffs, and albeit you only have 30 wins, so and you're going to play one of the best teams ever at that time, the Celtics. So, but you want to get into the playoffs. You want to give yourself a chance to win, and it just is mind-boggling that they were not interested in that, but over a minute restriction. And I think the joke was kind of on them how it turned into them getting into the playoffs, and I thought that playoff series, the way they highlighted it, was really the first time where everybody in the league knew that was the best player in the league. And even though they lost 3-0, that's what everybody came away. That was Jordan's best player in the league, and he's going to dominate going forward. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, that Celtics series was probably one of my favorite parts of last night's episodes. Was when he would go play golf with Danny Ainge.
Yeah.
And then he dropped 60 plus on them the next day. Like, you don't see that. Like, I think that just goes to show how different the NBA is today than it was back then. And, philosophies have evolved. Trash talk has evolved. The game has evolved. But, like, if you saw, like, you wouldn't see that in a game like today. Either you play him or you don't. I mean, there are minutes restrictions, but not on your best player, especially during crunch time like that. Either you shut him down for the year and you stick to it, or you play him and it's a full go. I feel like there's really no in between. At least if I were managing a team, that's what I would do. But granted, I'm here sitting at a desk talking to a computer and not managing a basketball team. So but that's up to me. I don't know how you guys feel about it. I'm sure you guys probably feel similarly to me. But that's the difference between the 80s and the 2020s.
Yeah, I think Twitter would melt down if, like, LeBron James and Steph Curry were playing golf in between game 2 and 3. I just, you would never hear the end of it, and that's just wild. And we kind of have that notion that the players today are all just so friendly and everything, and back then it wasn't. That was kind of a little indication that everybody it was kind of the same back then too in some respect. So I mean, that was definitely a nice little tidbit we got just last night.
Could you imagine if Twitter existed during that game?
Oh my God,
Wow.
meltdowns everywhere.
I don't know if I want it to exist now.
Yeah, you see what happens when like Kawhi does it. I mean, when he's resting the whole season, we call it load management now. It's like, oh, they're just resting for the playoffs. It's like, how many people either say it's either an effective strategy or it's stupid. And from Michael Jordan's standpoint, he hated it because he was always taught you go for the win. He didn't believe in tanking, and that's what clearly the Bulls valued that year. So, just squeaking into the playoffs like that, I mean, if he had been sad even more than that, they would have been having a top draft pick like they had hoped.
I mean, it depends on, to me, it depends on your stance, right? It depends on where you are currently sitting. So the Bulls had a chance to go to the playoffs. They also had a chance for the number one pick. But in terms of culture, I think it's important to note, like, culture is important here. And we look at the Hornets today. And the Hornets are stuck in purgatory. They can't tank themselves to the bottom of the NBA because Michael Jordan probably isn't letting them. I mean, you look at for that Bulls team, it was more about winning now because, at the end of the day, like, that is better for the culture standpoint. Versus, just trying to... Because the Bulls were losers. The Bulls were losers in their first 20 years of existence before Michael got there. And he single-handedly changed the culture. And that was part of it, was him being strong in his stance that he wanted to play. And I think that permeated throughout the rest of the organization. And I think that shows... where you are. And he said it earlier. He was like, he said it earlier in the episode where he was like, we have earned the right to defend. Like, we're playing for now. We're not playing for the future. It's not our business for the future. It's our business now. And that's what Michael Jordan's always been about, is he's going to do whatever it takes to win the game. Now, granted, in future years, it's been more about, what's important, this measly regular season game or the championship. And I think more teams have taken the stance of, we would rather try to go long haul and try to win the championship versus winning small games. I think, though, when you're a championship contender, you're more likely to do that versus when you're a bottom feeder trying to make it to the next level, you should be trying to win as many games as you possibly can.
Yeah, and if you're trying to change a culture, like, at some point, like, you lose a lot of games as a team, you hope that all that losing is going to make you, kind of become a better team at some point. But, 20 years of losing for Chicago, they've done enough losing. There's a lot of guys on the team that have done enough losing. You have a chance to get into the playoffs and just spark something. At least, if anything, you get momentum for the next year. We see that in football a lot. Why in the world would you be content with just losing again? And what kind of message does that send to the players? That just sends a message like, the people that are paying our checks don't believe in us. And I think Jordan took that to heart, and I think he said, I'm never letting this happen again. And you kind of see, like, right after that fight, like, they didn't win 30 games ever again. They were perennial 40, 45, 50, 60, 70 win teams going forward. I think that season played a lot, and that he was just not going to let that happen.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely culture plays, a huge part into a lot of these teams. I mean, you see it in the NBA now. You see, since Pat Riley has been there since the late 90s as, president of operations, you see him as, the Heat culture mentality where, they very much value their players and their front office being on the same page and really establishing a culture where, you don't have to tank. You don't have, even in your down years, you don't miss the playoffs by that much. You don't have to go into full rebuilds. You don't, have these locker room turmoil between front office, in the locker room, all this kind of stuff. So, I mean, definitely culture plays a huge part of any successful team. And you see early on that Michael Jordan was trying to establish that winning culture in a team that really had no culture at the time. You see they were getting outdrawn by the Blackhawks, who, if you know anything about hockey in the late 80s and early 90s and the mid 90s, the Blackhawks weren't winning anything. The Blackhawks weren't even, I think in the mid 90s to early 2000s, the Blackhawks weren't even on televised in Chicago. They were blacked out. So, they were getting outdrawn by them. They were getting outdrawn by, I forget what kind of team was it, a lacrosse team or something like that?
Or like an indoor team of some sort.
Yeah, it was an indoor team. Yeah,
the Chicago Sting or something.
Really.
Yeah, the Chicago Sting, an indoor soccer team.
Yeah, that's what it was, indoor soccer. So you see, just that now you think of that those '90s Bulls and all that, and you're like, how is that even possible that nobody was watching that team before then? But just before Michael Jordan's arrival, they were just in the threshold of hell.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, look, let's take. But I mean, here's something to consider though. They went on to get swept by the eventual champion Celtics that year. One of the best teams ever created, by the way, that '86 Celtics team. How much do you think that actually played a factor in the long run for the Bulls?
I think like I said, it kind of was not only was another motivating factor because of everything that happened beforehand, that they got into that series and you saw how well Michael played. And I think it just kind of, like I said, it kind of changed the league. Everybody said that's the guy. This is the best player in the league. And for the Bulls specifically, I think it's great. Anytime you get to play in the playoffs, no matter how short a stay is, it is playoff basketball. It's experience in some sort. And I'm sure Michael gained a lot from that series, like what I can do to win games and what else I need from my teammates as well. And they gathered a lot from that as well. And obviously that wasn't like the turning point right away because it would be 5 years before he would finally win it. But anytime you make the playoffs, experience matters. And Jordan was able to get all that experience and, go back to the drawing board over and over. What do I have to do? What can this team do to win? So I think it played a part absolutely in that. And you play one of the greatest teams of all time, and you get the respect that he got. Even in a sweep is a big deal I would think.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that Celtics team also, like they mentioned, had 4 future Hall of Famers. Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish, Larry Bird, and oh my God, blanking on the 4th.
Parrish, McHale, Bird.
Oh, Bill Walton.
Bill Walton. Yeah, so, I even remember Bill Walton. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, just that team was stacked, and you see that. I think it was Bill Walton right before the series started. They were asking him about Jordan. He's like, well, one man isn't going to change the league by himself. He's not going to carry a team like that. And you see Jordan literally carrying the Bulls in the first 2 games, and the only reason really why the Bulls were close in games 1 and 2, and the Celtics end up pulling out both wins, but it was only by anywhere from 5 to 10 points. So it was very close. Had Jordan not went off like that, who knows what they probably would have gotten blown out of the water. They were the 8th seed facing arguably the best team in basketball at that time. So they really, really impressed, and 99% of that was Jordan's contributing.
Right. Yeah, so they would go on to get swept by the Celtics in 1986, and then as well again in 1987. But in 1987, in the draft, they were able to acquire 5th overall pick Scottie Pippen in a trade with Seattle. And this is the beginning of where the Bulls really take off. And they didn't talk a whole lot about the early Pippen Jordan Bulls. I assume we'll get that in the next episode when Dennis Rodman comes in the fold, and they talk about the Pistons rivalry, but we do get a lot of talk about Scottie Pippen in the present day in the 97-98 season, where he is starting the season on the bench with an ankle injury that he chose to get surgery on after the offseason. And he said that was a very selfless decision by him because he chose to get surgery later than he probably could have, because he didn't feel the need to play for a team that didn't really want him. So, I mean, look, at the end of the day, the Bulls won the championship that year. So really, you can't really say that decision changed the season for them. But can you think, let's talk about, because there was a lot of talk about Scottie Pippen, and I was reading on Twitter a lot during the episode and after the episode about how grossly underpaid he was, because he signed an extension after his rookie contract in 1991 which kept him on the team until through the 97-98 season, and he was making $18 million over a span of 7 years. There's a lot of talk about how grossly underpaid he was. But what do you guys think about Scottie Pippen's contract?
One of the most
go ahead, Robert.
Sorry. Yeah, thanks. One of the most team-friendly deals you'll ever see. I mean, from Scottie Pippen's perspective, he talked on it. He said, the reason why he took the 7-year deal for $18 million was because he just wanted some, guarantee. He didn't want to screw it up. He wanted to make sure that he had that longevity. So he was okay taking the pay cut, and he was, sure that he would be able to, maybe get it restructured, maybe get it paid, and that's why, Michael Jordan sort of thinks that, when Scottie Pippen had the chance to get the surgery, he didn't, and he was trying to convince Jerry Reinsdorf to restructure contract. But, as they made it very clear, Jerry Reinsdorf was not the type of owner that was willing to listen to people who wanted to restructure their contracts. He did not believe in that at all. So, I think a lot of it was just Scottie Pippen banking on himself and really just saying, you know what, I'm in the league. I didn't think I'd get here, so I just want that longevity. But yeah, I mean, definitely a reason why they were able to have such a sustainable team for so long was because Scottie Pippen really wasn't getting paid that much. I think they said he was the 118th, 112th, somewhere around there, highest paid player in the league. And he's arguably the second best player in the NBA at that time. So, I mean, that's just unheard of now. I mean, now think about all the players, think about some of the players up there. They're getting paid, huge money. And, most of those teams, even as a number 2, you're still looking for a huge contract. You're not taking a team-friendly deal like that, really.
Yeah. What do you think, Nick?
Yeah, I was kind of with Robert on that one. I think at some point he thought it was going to get re-upped or in the middle of that contract, given his play and given the success of the team. And I think maybe when Jordan decided to walk away from baseball and Pippen carried the Bulls to a 50-win season, I think maybe he thought then, okay, look what you saw, what I did by myself. I'm pretty good too. Where's my contract? And I don't think it ever happened. And I think that was a tipping point for Scottie, and the injury was kind of just his way out. It was his scapegoat to where, okay, now I don't have to play. How bad do y'all want me? And I think from the owner's standpoint is Scottie Pippen at this point going into the 97-98 year was 31, 32 years old, I believe he was. And they were banking on, okay, he's probably not the player he once was. Why would I give him more pay than what he's had for the last 7 years? You can look at that whatever way you want, but it is a business. And I think that's why Jerry Reinsdorf, that was his name, correct?
Jerry Reinsdorf, the owner, yeah.
Yeah, Jerry Reinsdorf, yes. I think that was his thinking on that. Like I said, whether that's wrong or right or wrong, that's not up for me to say. But that was the business side of it, I believe. And Scottie Pippen sitting out intentionally like that, it's a double-edged sword because the player has the right. He is the player, and he has the right to do what he wants. Again, it is his team, though, and you were in the middle of trying to go for another three-peat. And you look at it like, how selfish can you be, like Michael Jordan said. But Pippen, I think, was just fed up and checked out. And I think that's why he did what he did.
Yeah, I think I read this tweet from Jamel Hill that I'm going to actually read out for you guys. And I think that's very important because we learn more about Scottie Pippen's backstory and how he was one of 12 siblings. But this was very... This was pretty important, I think. And it's a long thread, but I'm just going to read the first part of this thread. So this is what Jamel Hill had to tweet. Been thinking about Pippen's horrible deal with the Bulls, and one thing many are dismissing is the trauma that comes up with growing in poverty. And then the quadruple whammy of being black, poor, from the South, and the breadwinner of your family at a young age. So the thing with Scottie Pippen was he was given money and a chance, and it's something that he didn't necessarily mention in the documentary last night. He was talking about how he wanted to, at least if he ever got injured, he'd still be good. But I think what was important was he wanted to make sure his family was good for a long period of time, and I think that's what he was looking more for in his trade, in his deal. was he was looking more for his family and less for him, less for his team, less for anything. He was very selfless in his deal. He was the last person he was thinking about was himself. He was thinking about, how am I going to keep my mom and my dad good? How am I going to keep my siblings good? How am I going to keep... I don't necessarily think it was more about the team. I think it was more about himself and just making sure that he had enough money to care for his family. And he was given a boatload of money that no one in his family had ever come close to making. And in 1991, they were the defending champions. So that's when he got his extension. He got a 5-year extension after that. And that led all the way up through that dynasty, including when he was the star of the team when Michael Jordan left for those 2 years. But if you look at what Scottie Pippen did, like Jerry Reinsdorf said, like you mentioned, Nick, he said, Scottie, this is not a good deal for you. You should not take this. But Scottie wanted a long deal, and that's what he got. And should the Bulls have extended him maybe after title number 4 or title number 5? Maybe. Yeah, I would say why not. But that's the thing with players nowadays. Players have a lot more leverage when it comes to their contracts now. Not what you had in the 90s. The 90s was owners had all the leverage. But now that we live in the 2020s, players have more leverage than they've ever had before. And, yes, Scottie Pippen requested a trade, but that trade didn't come until after Michael Jordan retired. So even when he was saying, I will never play for the Bulls again, he still did.
Yeah.
And, to me, that just goes to show how much leverage that front office had. He only played in 44 games in that 97-98 season. He sat out probably the first half of that season, then came back for the stretch run in the playoffs, in which he, was pretty much the same. Maybe his numbers were a little bit lower than what he had seen previously, but nonetheless a very important part to that 97-98 team. But I think that was the part to me that was not shown a whole lot in yesterday's episodes. Was, I think, with Scottie Pippen, it wasn't about the team. It wasn't about the Bulls being... because the Bulls were very fair with him. The Bulls were saying, hey, we would pay you a lot more if you wanted it. But he wanted more years. And the Bulls said, well, if you want more years, we're going to have to cut him the salary. But he was okay with that. He was okay with that. And that might have been naive of him to think, as 26 years old, taking a contract like that. But then again, the revenue went up way. The revenue spiked up way more than they ever expected it, I believe. And the numbers of the max contracts, I think, were nowhere near what people thought. In his last season, in that season with the Bulls, Scottie Pippen made $2.2-ish million, like a little over $2 million. In the following year with the Rockets, and his one season with the Rockets, he made $11 million. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that was also part of it too. Now, if the Bulls say extend Scottie Pippen during their run, maybe things turn out a little bit different. But also, we come back to Jerry Krause, how we started this episode. Did Jerry Krause really want to extend a guy like Pippen, who was so against him for so long? And I think maybe Scottie Pippen was so against Jerry Krause because he wouldn't extend him, and because he was talking about trading him for a while, but never would tell him to his face. Maybe that, and that's probably where the animosity stemmed from, where Scottie Pippen comes from. But at the end of the day, I mean, Scottie Pippen, I feel like he can't really blame anyone but himself for that contract.
Yeah, and like when you started with Jamel Hill's tweet, kudos to her for putting that out there, because for guys like us, it's really hard to go into that kind of standpoint obviously because we're not black and we don't experience the type of things that they have to experience and what Scottie Pippen had to experience. So I appreciate her bringing that up because it allows you to look at it from that viewpoint a little bit better of why Scottie did it, and it's a very noble thing. I think I love what you said about taking care of his family, and I see that point a lot more now that he truly was selfless in what he did. And at the end of the day, it did play a part down the road in him wanting the more money, but he did what he had to do at the time he did it, and I don't think he really should bat himself too bad for that.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at even like a salary like that. I mean, to us, $2 million a year, like that's change now. That's an entry level contract in basketball now. But $2 million, for a guy that grew up very poor, in as he said, a very racist part of Arkansas. His family was poor. He had 11 siblings. His dad was paralyzed. His older brother was paralyzed. It seemed like he had a really, really rough upbringing in that sense. But, you see what he did with the money he made in the NBA in his early years. He used it to buy a house for his parents. And you see his mom in her home, and she has his jersey framed and all that. And she's getting teary-eyed and, talking about just the love he showed them. And, his brother says how much he took care of his parents and stuff with the money he made in the NBA. So you see how giving Scottie Pippen was. And, maybe to Scottie Pippen, it wasn't just about the money. At least that's not what it appeared like. It didn't appear like he was just, like, I just want, the biggest contract I can get. He was fine taking that $2 million and providing for himself, but also taking care of his parents who, were just not well off when he was growing up and needed to have, a better home and needed to be taken care of and make sure that their bills are paid and that, they have a home to live in. So he appeared very selfless in that second episode that they showed, surrounding the circumstances with his contract and the money he was making in the NBA at that time.
Yeah. Another tweet that I want to bring up before we sign off here. So Larsa Pippen, who is Scottie Pippen's ex-wife, they were married for 20 years. They recently got divorced about a year or two ago, but she tweeted a picture. She tweeted a picture of Scottie Pippen and his career earnings. You guys want to guess how much he made in his earnings? And this is according to Bleacher Report. So this is Bleacher Report. So I trust this source. So how much did Scottie Pippen make during his career?
I believe it was like $109 million.
Yeah, $109 million. You probably read this. You probably read it as well.
Yeah, I've seen it on Sports Reference. Yeah.
Yeah. So he made $109 million throughout his career. The 31st greatest, handsomely paid player in the NBA. It even says here that he pulled in almost $20 million more than Michael Jordan did in his playing days, which I would assume that has to do with the fact that Michael Jordan played a little bit earlier than Scottie Pippen did, and he also missed out on 2 years during his career. But I mean, hey, like Scottie Pippen, even though, like I don't know that I think look that $109 million, he made a lot of money. He could have made a lot more money, but at the end of the day, like it's millionaires complaining about millions, and
yeah.
At the end of the day, I don't think Scottie Pippen came off as very pompous when he was like saying, "Oh, hey." I think he wanted to be paid more so just for the recognition and the fact, just so that people could, that he could be rewarded for what he had done. Not necessarily the money part of it, but more so the credit part of it, which is something here that really seems to be the root of the entire problem that the Bulls had, was their inability to, despite winning so much as a team, they all wanted individual credit for it. They didn't want to take the credit. The credit as a team wasn't enough for them. It wasn't enough for Jerry Krause. It wasn't enough for Scottie Pippen. It wasn't enough for any of those guys. Yet, because they had Michael Jordan, the greatest basketball player to ever live, that is what carried them to 6 titles.
Yeah, and about the money, like I saw the breakdown. Scottie, the reason why I got that much money is if you look at the last 5 or 6 years he played with Houston and then the Blazers, he was making over $10 million a year for about 5-6 years in a row. and that allowed his money to accumulate. And the other interesting thing I saw was Jordan made around, anywhere from 2 to 4 or 5 million his entire career, and then in '96 and '97 he had a $30 million salary both those years, which I would have to go do some research as to why he had that contract like that for those 2 years, but that is kind of pretty insane to look at when it comes to the money aspect of it, based on what I was seeing.
Yeah, I think. Well, and look, Scottie Pippen. I don't think anyone's faulting Scottie Pippen here for taking that payday later in his career. But would you say that Scottie Pippen, at the end of the day, what is Scottie Pippen? Was he selfish for doing what he did in the 97-98 season? Was that selfish of him, or was that justified? Just a quick answer.
Tough question. I mean, it's, certainly from Michael Jordan's perspective, it looked like maybe it was a little bit selfish, given how they started with, Scottie Pippen on the bench because he was injured. It just seemed like without him, they were very rudderless. They reverted back to a really poor team, even though they still had a ton of talent with Scottie Pippen out. But, so certainly for him, like he said, he didn't have to sit out. He could have gotten that surgery immediately after the season ended, and he could have been ready for the next season, but he didn't. He decided to sort of stick it to the Bulls and sit out. So, I mean, certainly from that aspect, it looks a little bit selfish, but I mean, also, it's a matter of him feeling that he needs to be recognized. And, like you said, Jeremy, there was a lot of egos on the team, like not ego in the sense of like bad egos, but egos where, guys just want to get their due. They don't want to just hear, well, it's Michael's team. Oh, well, the Bulls are really, really good, but it all stems from Michael. But, I'm sure from Pippen's perspective, look at Michael before Pippen arrived. No titles, yes, Horace Grant was there and stuff like that. And there was other good players around Jordan, but not to the level of when Pippen got there. When Pippen got there is when they really started taking off. And, that's the number one argument I hear when I hear Jordan debates about being the GOAT is, well, he didn't do it without Scottie Pippen. So, it's the Batman to the Robin. You kind of have to give equal representation there as far as, who contributes the most to that team. But, definitely, I mean, you can see it both ways where it's selfish on Pippen's part, but you also kind of understand why he was thinking the way he does and why he had such a problem with the front office at that time.
Yeah. I think what he did ultimately was justified. And I'm usually more on the team side, but I think with Scottie Pippen, it was justified because the Bulls gave him the impression that they weren't very interested in having him play. So if you're not interested in having Scottie play, then Scottie doesn't owe you anything. Scottie did not owe the Bulls anything. The Bulls owed Scottie. And not necessarily money-wise, but the Bulls owed Scottie some respect. At least, it wasn't even a matter of, the Bulls could have traded Scottie Pippen if they wanted if he wanted to get more money. But it was more about the fact that the way they went about it, the sneakiness behind it that Jerry Krause sort of started, according to Scottie Pippen, of course. But I think that the Bulls did not show him the love that he was looking for. And yeah, I would be pretty frustrated too if I knew that, my boss didn't think very highly of me and was expecting me to do all of these things, and it turned out that he didn't really care at the end of the day. I wouldn't want to come into work either. So I don't blame Scottie one bit for what he did. Yes, it might have been selfish on the team's part, but at the end of the day, like, you have to know your worth. And I think Scottie Pippen, at that point in his career, finally recognized his worth. Nick, do you have anything to add?
Oh, sorry about that. I was having connection issues. Could you repeat the last part you said?
Yeah, Scottie Pippen, at the end of his career in Chicago, finally figured out his worth.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he realized that even though Jordan was Batman, like Robert said, he was Robin, and every Batman needs a Robin to win a championship. It's always been like that in the NBA. Nobody can do it on their own, and they really needed each other. And Michael Jordan even said it. You can't say the name Michael Jordan without saying the name Scottie Pippen.
Mm-hmm.
And Pippen knew that, and Jordan knew that. I think everybody back then should have ought to known that if you were looking through a clear lens. So Pippen obviously understood the value that he brought to the Bulls, and he deserved better, and he thought that as well.
Yeah. I think this is a good place to park the car. But, guys, thank you so much, Nick and Robert, for coming on the podcast and talking some Last Dance. This was, in this quarantine, it was very refreshing to have some sports content to consume and to discuss. So I'm glad that you two were here to discuss it with me, and I had a lot of fun watching it. I hope that we can get back together in a couple weeks or next week and talk more Last Dance.
Definitely.
Something to look forward to for four more Sundays.
Yep. This was something great to be on, since I believe today would have actually been, not to depress anybody, this would have been the start of the NBA playoffs today.
NBA playoffs would have started this past weekend. Yeah. But we got the Last Dance instead. So, I mean, hey, nothing too much. But we also have a lot going on this week at Hitting the Field, despite our quarantine situation. It's the biggest week of Hitting the Field this year. It's draft week. We have our NFL draft show live at 8 p.m. Eastern on Thursday. You'll catch me, Robert, and Nick on the show throughout the night as we comment through the first round of the NFL draft. We're expecting a night of chaos, and we are going to celebrate it together. So come celebrate it with us and tune in to the Hitting the Field draft show Thursday night at 8 p.m. Eastern. But we also got more in store. We just recorded our HTF Senior Send-Off just a couple hours ago. It's currently on our YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel at Hitting the Field. And for all the updates, you can follow us on Twitter at Hitting the Field, on Instagram, and at Hitting the Field on Twitter as well. We also have more draft coverage coming in throughout the week. Our Might I Add finale with me, Kyle Partain, and Chris Wolf will be out tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that as well. We're going to talk about all of our UCF sports memories throughout our time at UCF. So it should be a fun week in store. And of course, we'll be back a week from today to talk more Last Dance. So again, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you on the flip side.